A Quiet Place is John Krasinski's first major Hollywood hit as a director. It released in 2018 to very positive reviews. Or did it? Let's see what the critics have to say about A Quiet Place. First thing to note is that if you go to IMDb and look up this movie, it has a 7.5. It's based off of 355,000 votes. They build tension really well. They don't overuse music. They don't overuse sound effects. That's one of the big things about this is there isn't a lot of sound used. So when you do finally hear something, or actually when the characters do finally talk, it actually has an emotional impact. Our first review comes from the Washington Post. A Quiet Place stars Emily Blunt in an ingeniously, A Quiet Place stars Emily Blunt in an ingeniously inventive horror thriller. A Quiet Place deploys the most classic conventions of similar films that have done it before, including jump scares, creepy-looking creatures, frightening camera angles, and a terrifying sound design. In this case, though, even the most familiar gestures look, and more poignantly sound, brand new. Overall, a really good start. I like how she mentions that there's not anything new. Actually, I think the premise is kind of new, right? But it's kind of a genre film. Like, you know, it's going to have jump scares, it's going to have all these different things, but its take on it makes it really fresh. A Quiet Place opens in a leafy small town in upstate New York. On day 89 of a mysterious invasion, these clicking, hissing aliens hide out for most of the day, quickly swooping in to dispatch their victims only when attracted by a loud noise. And then she dives right into the plot itself, so you kind of know what to expect. So I think already this is shaping out to be pretty positive. The only thing, the title was a little wordy, a little clunky, but other than that, it's a pretty good review so far. Like the best movies, A Quiet Place teaches the audience how to watch it within the first 10 minutes, during which characters are introduced. The stage is set, and the stakes are established and heightened in a sequence that plays out entirely without words, but not without sound. One of the things I love about A Quiet Place, because I love this movie, I watched it at least 2 or 3 times now. What I love is that it doesn't tell you so much stuff. It shows you what's going on. Because I think the problem with a lot of movies, especially horror movies, is they get bogged down in like, they're trying to set a scene and then they go into all this exposition of saying, oh, well, this bad guy did this, or like this curse was from like 10,000 years ago and now this and this and this and this. No. The movie starts off essentially dead quiet. They're scavenging for stuff, and then it just hits the fan, right? And it does this without saying anything. Very, very, very minimal use of words throughout the entire film, and it's still engaging and still entertaining, right? It's hard to do that. If you want to do it for the entire film, like you can probably get away with it for like 10 minutes, but they do have like, you know, a soundtrack and stuff like that. It's very ambient for the most part. But the intro, yeah, the reviewer's completely right. It really sets you up for this film because it shows you that it's a bit of a slow burn, but there's still plenty of action, there's still plenty of tension. And I love that it started off that way. The action ratchets up considerably in the final 45 minutes, when the monsters that Krasinski has wisely framed in brief, elusive blurs of movement come into more frightening focus. He stages some unforgettable set pieces here, including a moment of peril in a silo that gives new meaning to Children of the Corn, and Blunt's character evading a giant Auroris dentata with spider-like legs, while her husband is occupied elsewhere. Pacing, I think, is perfect. You don't really see the monster that much in the beginning. It's like, it's like in and out, and that's it. But then, yeah, towards the end, you really get up and close with it. You know what you're facing. Really good pacing. And the use of Latin here in her review, positive. Give it like plus 10 points. I am that Latin dude. So I like that a lot. As a celebration of the physical expressiveness and visual storytelling of silent cinema, A Quiet Place speaks volumes without a word being uttered. That's really good. I think this is really close to silent cinema. And I like that. I actually prefer it when there's less dialogue, when you focus on show us the story you're trying to tell, right? Use the actors, use the setting, use your camera to let us know how they're feeling. Focus more on the facial expressions. Maybe it's because I watched too many telenovelas growing up, but like the expression, like I don't think people focus as much on people's expressions in movies, right? Because you can say so much without saying anything. And this movie does such a great job of capturing that. And it's almost like a little homage to silent films, right? Just because the dialogue is so sparse throughout. And that's a great point that the reviewer makes. This is a great review. I actually really liked it. Washington Post can be up or down on their reviews. depending what they're reviewing, but this was spot on. I highly recommend it. The reviews tended to either be from like 60 upwards, so I guess like a 3 out of 5 upwards. So this is one of the lower reviews from The Atlantic. A Quiet Place silently jangles the nerves. John Krasinski wrote, directed, and stars in this very effective horror film set in a world where making noise can be deadly. As a director and an actor, John Krasinski should be applauded for knowing the power of a close-up on a face. Maybe that's thanks to his years on NBC's The Office. Kind of a weak intro. You know, I figured that at least some of these reviews are going to get into The Office, and that's fine. I wouldn't do it in your first paragraph. Like, you want to establish what this movie is about, right? People want to know about the movie itself, and then they want that kind of background afterwards. So having that intro paragraph, I would say closer towards the end would probably be a lot better. Were these beasts created by man, or did they drop from the sky? The answers aren't really laid out for the viewer in the script. I like that the reviewer goes into the fact that you don't really know what's happening, right? And you don't, even towards the end, you don't really find out what caused this, where the creatures come from, what's happening with the outside world. The story is about the family at the end of the day. Yeah, there are these monsters and stuff like that, but it's about the family unit, how they interact, how they change roles, how they survive together. So I like that the reviewer highlights this. And yeah, there are little tidbits throughout the movie, so you can see little things that happen in the newspapers. Krasinski's character has a basement where he has like, these different clippings and stuff like that. He's trying to figure out what's happening. He's trying to figure out if there's like other places outside of his town that he can communicate with people. There's also a scene where like there are other survivors and they do like light little fires to let each other know like at night that they're still there, I guess. I love how they did that. It's like they kind of set that up somehow. I would imagine it's like, I don't even think they saw each other. It's like, I think one of them just started it. And so someone else started doing it just to signal each other, just have signifiers. I think that's really cool. The thing is, though, the reviewer then goes into some minor spoilers. He does kind of spoil the first 10 minutes of the film, which, as the previous reviewer from the Post said, it's better to go in fresh. It's better to go in fresh, especially with this film. Kind of sucks that he spoils that. If you haven't seen it, I'm not going to include that part, but be careful when you're reading reviews. Perhaps the most difficult detail to wrap one's mind around as a viewer is that Evelyn is pregnant. The decision to bring a baby into this specific world is unthinkable, not just because the future's so grim, but also because babies are quite skilled at making noise. It's about survival. Like, you have to learn to adapt. Like, that's what makes humans, that's why we're like the apex predators, right? It's not that we're the strongest or, you know, the fastest things. We're the most adaptable. We adapt to different things. And I think that's what Krasinski's trying to show. It's like, yes, they got pregnant. One, they still love each other, so, you know, they're still getting it on. But two, it's like they have to survive. And that's the whole point. They're surviving. There are people out there trying to survive. I kind of like that about the film. You don't really see that. Normally when it's post-apocalyptic, it's all like despair. It's like there's no point in living because everything's stacked against you. When I would say it's the opposite, right? Everything's always going to be stacked against you, but you should always keep moving forward. And I think that's a great message in the movie. Hopefully it doesn't spoil the review. It's a little throwaway line in the review a little bit. Because then the reviewer does back it up with like, this is the crux of the film that he's trying to tell. At 90 minutes, A Quiet Place doesn't overstay its welcome. It's the perfect length, this film, especially because you don't have a ton of dialogue. 90 minutes is perfect. Like, you go in, you get all the beats you need to, and boom, it leaves. And the way it ends, I love the way it ends. If it was up to me, I know they have a sequel that's coming out. I'm definitely going to see it. Like, I think the sequel is going to be good, but I'm a little concerned because I think this one was more like, it's very rare in horror films where you see the good of people in general. So this one is definitely focusing more on like families are good and, you know, they need to survive in this crazy world. The sequel, we'll see what happens. But if I could make the sequel, it would be a complete 180. Just because of the way it ends, I would turn into like a high octane like action film like Crank or something like that, right? Just like she has a shotgun and they know something about the creatures towards the end, and it would be hilarious if they just took a 180 with the sequel. But yeah, great review. I think, again, spoils some stuff in it, and the opening paragraph, a little weak. But other than that, pretty solid review. Now, let's look at, like I said earlier, let's look at those 355,000 reviews. I've reviewed them, and I'm going to present to you the best ones that I think do a good job of representing the spectrum of people that A Quiet Place appeals to. The film's main flaw are its own creatures, who kill whatever makes a sound, and the lack of explanation behind them makes the concept feel rushed. Gives it a 7 out of 10, but that's a terrible review. That's the whole point. Like, that's what builds attention, as I mentioned before, is that you don't know anything in the background. And I think we're it's a much better film because of it. That's what I'm a little bit worried about A Quiet Place Part 2. I hope they don't go far into the details. Maybe a little bit more of what happened, but maybe focusing more. I think it looks like it's going to focus more on what other people did to survive, right? If they start explaining things about the creature, it's kind of like, it's going to be like The Matrix. Like, what was it? Matrix Reloaded, when they had the architect explain everything. Like, that's a terrible thing. So it's a bad review. Are you serious? Who leaves the youngest child so far behind in line? Who makes babies in an apocalyptic world where sound is your worst problem? The creature rips through a silo like it's paper, but has difficulties with a rusty pickup truck. Again, another terrible review. First, when has anyone ever been successful from keeping people from doing it, right? Like, it doesn't matter if it's the apocalypse. If you're with someone, you're with someone. Like, no one's gonna stop. The only good point, I will say, makes a good point of the creature ripping through the silo but having a problem with the truck. That is actually a good point. Because the other stuff, like, they prepared for the baby. Like, you're gonna have to have babies regardless, like, unless you want humans to die out, right? Like, you're gonna have to have kids. So it's a dumb observation and critique. But the reviewer does make a good point, because there is a point where the creature rips through a steel silo but can't rip through a truck. And that is a little, I know, you gotta suspend your disbelief a little bit, but if you're gonna nitpick it, I think that is a good nitpick. This is a good movie if one is willing to overlook the hundreds, literally hundreds of logical fallacies in this movie. Pretty terrible review. I'm not even gonna get into the, 5 or 6 points this person makes. You're expecting people, humans, to make every single right choice every single time. That doesn't make any sense. I think the best part is this. The monsters don't really seem that formidable after further inspection, and if the family followed any of the tips I mentioned, they could live with little difficulty. Yes, I think that's the best part, because as a person watching a film, not in an experience, right? Oh yeah, it's all easy, because I see the beginning, the middle, of the end. I have all the information. So if you had all the information, everything would be perfect, right? This is the dumbest review I've ever seen. This is like one of those like armchair historian types, or like an armchair general or something, right? Who like reviews battles that have happened like 200 years ago. It's like, oh yes, if they would have done this, it's so obvious, and you could do that. This is so stupid. Like, this guy has his head up his ass, so it's a terrible review. So overall, a great film, and the reviews were really good. It seems that the users, like, if you're super nitpicky, don't watch any film, right? Like, that's when I saw the negative reviews. Even the one that was 1 out of like 10 stars was like, it's not a bad film, it's just illogical because they didn't take my advice. Like, it wasn't a real negative review. Like, this film is a solid film. I think it's definitely like, out of 5, I'd give it at least like a 4 or something like that. Like, it's really high up there. Really great to watch it again. It's great. It's so well put together too. It's like, it gets right to the point. So definitely worth seeing. Reviews for it, really good. I haven't seen anything that's like super bad or anything. So it goes to show that if you make a good film, you get good reviews.